At exactly 6:44 a.m. on a Wednesday, the commander of USS Nitsy received a contact report that every destroyer captain in the Fifth Fleet dreads. 47 Iranian naval vessels, a combination of IRGCN fast attack craft, Kilo-class submarine support ships, and 3 Mauj-class frigates, were forming up 6 nautical miles off the port beam, not approaching, not retreating, forming up, in deliberate, choreographed tactical geometry that the Nitsy's intelligence officer recognized immediately from a classified threat assessment briefing she had attended in Bahrain 4 days earlier. Iran was running exercise ZOLFAGHAR-5, the most aggressive naval provocation the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy had staged in the Persian Gulf in 11 years. The exercise had been announced publicly, which is part of what made it so dangerous. When Iran announces an exercise, it creates legal and diplomatic ambiguity around every action its forces take within the designated exercise area. Fast boats that cross inside the 500-yard safety threshold aren't attacking, they're exercising. Helicopters that overfly American destroyers aren't threatening, they're conducting airspace familiarization. Radar locks that illuminate American warships for 30, 40, 60 seconds at a time aren't targeting, they're sensor calibration. Each individual action, taken in isolation, sits in a gray zone that American rules of engagement are designed to navigate carefully, which is exactly what Iran designed it to do. They weren't trying to start a war that morning. They were trying to demonstrate that they could stand close enough to start one, on terms entirely of their choosing, at a moment entirely of their choosing. That demonstration has a specific strategic purpose, and Washington had been watching it build for 3 weeks. This is the story of what happens when a regional power attempts to rewrite the rules of naval deterrence through controlled escalation, and what it looks like when the world's most capable maritime force decides the demonstration is over. To understand what Iran was attempting in the Persian Gulf that Wednesday morning, you need to understand the geography that makes this body of water unlike any other contested space on Earth. The Persian Gulf is not an ocean, it is barely a sea. At 615 miles long and averaging 150 miles in width, it is a shallow, enclosed body of water with a single exit point, the Strait of Hormuz, 21 miles wide at its narrowest navigable channel. Every drop of oil leaving Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, and Iran passes through that strait. Approximately 20% of the world's total oil supply transits those 21 miles every single day. On the days when that number is threatened, oil markets move. On the days when it is actually interdicted, the global economy begins to fracture within weeks. Iran understands this geography with an intimacy that no external power can fully replicate. The northern coastline of the Persian Gulf belongs to Iran for its entire length. Iranian radar installations cover every square mile of the Gulf's surface. Iranian coastal defense missiles are dug into hillsides and dispersed into hardened underground facilities from Bandar Abbas to Bushehr. Iranian fast attack boats can reach any point in the Gulf from their home ports in less than 2 hours. This is Iran's pond. They have spent 40 years turning it into the most densely defended body of water on Earth, specifically to challenge the one thing they cannot accept: permanent American naval presence in a sea they regard as their sovereign strategic domain. The United States has maintained continuous naval presence in the Persian Gulf since 1949. Not intermittent presence, not rotational deployment, continuous. The Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain, has kept warships in these waters through Iranian revolutions, hostage crises, tanker wars, 2 Gulf wars, nuclear negotiations, and 100 smaller confrontations that never made the front page. The strategic logic is simple and has not changed in 75 years. American naval presence in the Persian Gulf is the physical manifestation of the security guarantee that keeps global oil markets stable, keeps Gulf state governments confident enough to maintain production, and keeps the strait open for the 20% of world oil supply that depends on it. Remove that presence, and the security architecture of the entire Middle East begins to shift in ways that are difficult to predict and impossible to reverse quickly. Iran wants that presence gone. Not because of any single dispute, though there are plenty. Because American naval presence in the Persian Gulf is the structural constraint on Iranian regional ambition. As long as the Fifth Fleet is there, Iran cannot translate its geography into the kind of decisive leverage that its leadership believes the country's position entitles it to. Every exercise, every provocation, every harassment incident in the Gulf is a variation on the same strategic question: what would it cost America to stay? Exercise ZOLFAGHAR-5 was the most elaborate version of that question Iran had ever posed. At 6:44 a.m., USS Nitze's Combat Information Center logged the initial contact report and immediately transmitted it to 5th Fleet Headquarters in Bahrain and to USS Harry S. Truman, the carrier strike group operating 110 nautical miles to the southeast. The duty officer at 5th Fleet woke the admiral. The admiral looked at the contact picture, looked at the exercise pattern developing on the display, and said 4 words. "Get me Washington on the line." The call lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, the admiral had his guidance. The response to exercise ZOLFAGHAR-5 would not be a withdrawal to safer distance. It would not be a diplomatic note. It would be a demonstration executed in the same physical space the Iranians had chosen for their own demonstration. At the same time, visible to the same audience of Gulf state navies, international shipping operators, and satellite surveillance systems tracking the entire Gulf in real time. Washington was going to answer Iran's question, and the answer was going to be delivered in a language that required no translation. At 7:02 a.m., USS Harry S. Truman received new orders. The carrier was to change course northwest and close the exercise area at maximum sustained speed. Every aircraft on the flight deck was to be spotted and armed. The combat air patrol was to be doubled to 8 aircraft, and the 2 Arleigh Burke destroyers screening the carrier, USS Gravely and USS Cole, were to take up positions that placed them between the carrier and the Iranian formation with their SPY-1D radars in full active emission mode. The message was not subtle, which was entirely the point. Here is what it actually means when a carrier strike group goes to full combat posture in a confined body of water, because the term gets used frequently and the reality behind it is not widely understood. A carrier at normal operating tempo is a busy place. Aircraft are launching and recovering on a continuous cycle. Maintenance crews are turning aircraft around in hangars. Weapons elevators are moving munitions. It functions like a small city, purposeful, loud, continuously active, but it is activity organized around scheduled operations and planned contingencies. A carrier at full combat posture is something different, something that anyone who has seen it from the outside, from an Iranian frigate 6 miles away, for instance, would have no difficulty recognizing. The flight deck transforms. Aircraft that were parked in holding patterns are repositioned to catapult stations with weapons loaded. The ship's defensive radar increases its emission power and begins painting everything within 200 miles with the kind of energy that tells every electronic warfare sensor in the region that this ship is now looking for something to kill. The escort destroyers change their formation geometry, spreading out to optimize firing lanes and radar coverage rather than sailing in the economical close formation that conserves fuel on long transits. The submarine that has been operating submerged without transmitting anything shifts to a faster speed. That generates acoustic signatures detectable to the Iranian sonar operators who know what to listen for. None of this requires firing a single shot. It is a communication in the language of military capability, and the message it conveys is precise. Every system on this strike group has just shifted from standby to ready. The difference between where we are now and weapons release is a single authorization. We are showing you what that looks like so that you understand exactly where the line is. The Iranians understood the message perfectly. They had been studying American naval posture indicators for decades. They could read the flight deck geometry. They could read the radar emissions. They could read the formation spacing of the destroyers. They understood that the strike group had just told them, without ambiguity, that the next Iranian action which crossed a specific threshold would receive a kinetic response. What happened next was the most dangerous phase of the entire incident, because Iran had to decide, in real time, whether to back down or escalate, and backing down, in the institutional culture of the IRGCN, carries its own severe costs. At 7:34 a.m., 3 Iranian IRGCN fast attack boats broke from the main formation and accelerated toward USS Cole at high speed, not toward the carrier, toward the destroyer, 32 knots, closing from 2 nautical miles. At that speed, time to the 500-yard safety boundary was approximately 4 minutes. This was the calibrated provocation, not an attack, not a demonstration that could be ignored. A crossing of the line that forced Cole's commanding officer to make a decision with incomplete information in real time, which is exactly the scenario the IRGCN had designed. The commanding officer of USS Cole made his decision in approximately 9 seconds. He ordered his bridge team to set general quarters. He ordered his combat information center to lock fire control radar on all 3 approaching vessels. He ordered his 5-inch gun crew to man their station and train the weapon toward the approaching boats. And he got on the bridge-to-bridge radio on Channel 16, the international maritime distress and hailing frequency that every vessel in the Persian Gulf monitors, and transmitted in clear English. Unknown vessels. This is USS Cole, a United States Navy warship. You are approaching at high speed on a course that will violate the safety of my vessel. Alter course immediately or I will take necessary action to defend my ship. This is your final warning. Channel 16 transmissions in the Persian Gulf are monitored by every merchant vessel in the area, every Gulf state naval asset, every commercial maritime traffic service, and every intelligence gathering platform that operates in the region, which includes assets from at least a dozen nations. Whatever the 3 Iranian boats did in the next 4 minutes would be observed, recorded, and reported to every capital that mattered within the hour. The boats maintained course for 47 seconds. Then they turned. Not all the way. Not a retreat. A course change that reduced the closure rate while maintaining the psychological pressure. They were still coming toward Cole, just more slowly, and they began circling. 3 boats in a loose counterclockwise orbit around the destroyer at a range of approximately 900 yards. Inside the 1,000-yard caution zone. Outside the 500-yard engagement threshold. Exactly in the gray zone that Iran had spent years identifying and exploiting. Inside Cole's Combat Information Center, every engagement option for the 3 circling boats had already been calculated and displayed. The tactical action officer knew what weapon he would use, from which launcher, with which intercept geometry, at what range. He was not guessing. He was waiting for the authorization or the threshold crossing that would make authorization unnecessary. The 3 boats circled for 11 minutes. Then the main Iranian formation did something that nobody in 5th Fleet headquarters had predicted. At 7:51 a.m., the 3 Mauj-class frigates at the center of the Iranian exercise formation began an extended-range missile drill, not pointed at Cole, not pointed at Truman, pointed southeast, away from all American assets, into an empty section of Gulf with a declared exercise exclusion zone that had been filed with the International Maritime Organization 3 weeks earlier. 4 C-802 anti-ship missiles launched from the lead frigate, Jamaran, in a ripple sequence. Then 4 more from the second frigate, Damavand. The missiles flew their exercise profiles, conducting a coordinated attack simulation against a notional target at 18 nautical miles, before executing self-destruct sequences at pre-programmed waypoints well within the exclusion zone. The entire drill was procedurally legal. It was textbook compliance with international maritime exercise protocols. What made it a provocation was the geometry. The launch bearings, plotted on any tactical display in the region, ran directly through the position of USS Truman at distances that any competent naval analyst could calculate as within engagement range. The Iranians weren't shooting at the carrier. They were showing the carrier's crew exactly what the solution would look like if they were. The message was sophisticated in a way that previous IRGCN provocations had not been. They weren't trying to start a fight. They were demonstrating that they had practiced for one. At 7:58 a.m., Washington sent its own message back. The Nimitz-class carrier USS Harry S. Truman does not move quickly on paper. 100,000 tons of displacement, 1,092 feet long. It looks from the outside like a building that somehow ended up at sea. But at flank speed, the 4-shaft nuclear propulsion plant generates over 280,000 shaft horsepower and drives the ship to speeds that remain classified but are generally estimated at over 34 knots. At that speed, the carrier creates a wake visible on satellite imagery from orbit and audible to submarines at ranges of 40 nautical miles. At 7:58 a.m., USS Harry S. Truman went to flank speed. At the same moment, the flight deck launched 8 A-18F Super Hornets in 2 rapid-fire sequences, 4 off-the-bow catapults in 90 seconds, then 4 more. The aircraft climbed to 25,000 feet, formed into 2 4-ship tactical formations, and turned northwest, toward the Iranian exercise formation, not threatening, not crossing into Iranian airspace, flying a standard combat air patrol pattern that happened to have its southern boundary 11 nautical miles from the Jamaran. At 8:04 a.m., USS Leyte Gulf, the cruiser screening the carrier, activated its SPY-1A radar in full illumination mode and began actively tracking every vessel in the Iranian exercise formation. Every radar operator on every Iranian ship felt their threat warning systems activate simultaneously as the American radar's energy washed over them. This is not a pleasant sensation if you understand what it means. An SPY-1A in full active illumination is feeding data to a fire control system. The fire control system is calculating firing solutions. The firing solutions are being reviewed by a human being who has the authority to authorize weapons release. The Iranians knew exactly what was happening to their ships in that moment. At 8:09 a.m., the three fast attack boats circling USS Cole abruptly increased speed, turned northwest, and rejoined the main exercise formation. At 11:30 a.m., as the last Iranian vessels dropped below the horizon to the north, USS Harry S. Truman resumed its scheduled flight operations. The Super Hornets on combat air patrol recovered, refueled, and rearmed. The aircraft that had been spotted on the catapults for the last 4 hours were stood down from immediate launch status and returned to their hangar positions. The destroyer formation closed back to its standard screening geometry. The SPY-1A radar on Leyte Gulf returned to its normal scanning parameters. The carrier strike group looked, from the outside, exactly as it had looked at 6:43 a.m., before the Iranian exercise formation had assembled 6 miles off the port beam. Which was itself a message, the most efficient message of the entire encounter. 4 hours of sustained confrontation with the most aggressive Iranian naval provocation in 11 years. And the carrier strike group required no time to recover. There was nothing to recover from. The watch rotation continued. The maintenance cycles continued. The flight operations schedule, shifted by 4 hours, was already being rebuilt by the operations officer for the afternoon cycle. On the flight deck, an ordnance crew was loading AMK-84 general-purpose bomb onto the wing station of an F/A-18F. The pilot stood nearby doing her pre-flight walk-around, running through the checklist with the methodical efficiency of someone who has performed the same sequence 600 times and finds nothing remarkable about it. Behind her, 110 miles of open Persian Gulf stretched southeast toward the Strait of Hormuz. Beyond the strait, the Gulf of Oman. Beyond that, the Indian Ocean. And beyond that, a world that requires, as it has required for 75 years, that those waters remain open. The Iranians ran their exercise. They fired their missiles into an empty exclusion zone. They circled a destroyer for 11 minutes and then went home. The Americans moved closer and stayed. That is deterrence, not a press release, not a threat, a location, maintained. There is a moment in every one of these confrontations, and there have been more than 200 documented incidents between American and IRGCN naval forces in the Persian Gulf since 1987, where an Iranian commander has to make a real-time decision about how far the escalation ladder goes today. The decision is made under pressure, with incomplete information, by a human being who answers to a chain of command that has its own pressures and its own calculations. Most of the time, the decision is to stop, to circle at 900 yards instead of 400, to withdraw rather than cross the threshold that transforms an exercise into a shooting war. This is not cowardice. It is rational calculation by people who understand, at an operational level, what the outcome of crossing that threshold actually looks like. The fast boat crews who circled USS Cole for 11 minutes knew what the ship they were circling could do to them. They understood the geometry. They understood the weapons. They maintained their position not because they were unafraid, but because their orders and their training told them that this was the line and they would hold it and not cross it. The American crews on Cole knew the same thing. They tracked. They calculated. They waited for a threshold crossing that did not come. They exercised exactly the discipline that American naval training is designed to produce. The ability to hold a weapons system at the ready without using it, to communicate resolve without initiating the engagement, to stand in the gray zone without letting the gray zone become a killing ground. That mutual calculation, executed simultaneously by adversaries who each understand precisely what the other is capable of, is what keeps the Persian Gulf from becoming a catastrophe on an ordinary Wednesday morning. It is the most invisible form of deterrence, the war that does not happen, the exchange on Channel 16 that never required a follow-up shot, the submarine ping that communicated everything without a single torpedo leaving its tube. 11 years from now, there will probably be another exercise Zulfiqar. The name will be different. The vessel classes involved will be more advanced. The drones will be faster and more numerous. The ballistic missiles will be more accurate. The IRGCN will have spent a decade studying the gaps and limitations in American defensive systems that this encounter revealed, and they will have worked to exploit them. The escalation ladder will have been adjusted based on what worked this time and what didn't. And in the Persian Gulf, unless the geopolitical architecture of the Middle East has changed in ways that are impossible to currently predict, there will be an American carrier strike group, with updated radar systems and longer-range interceptors and submarines that are quieter and faster than the Indiana, with pilots who have been running combat air patrol over the same Gulf waters since before the Iranian exercise commanders were born, with a flight deck that puts aircraft into the air on a cycle that has not meaningfully changed since 1944, because some things are optimal and cannot be improved upon, only maintained. The Iranians will form up, the Americans will close the range, someone will get on Channel 16, and the oil will keep moving through the strait. That is the story that never makes the front page, the deterrence that works by never becoming news. The 43 minutes on a Wednesday morning in the Persian Gulf that kept the world running as expected, with no dramatic climax, no visible winners, no photograph to anchor a headline. Just a carrier, holding position. Just the math,